Hi, I'm Camilla Mortensen. This is Occupy TV, where we discuss the issues that gave rise to the Occupy movement. Today we'll be featuring David Barsamian of Alternative Radio and citizen investigator Lonnie Clark.
I arose in the depths of the blackest night, eyes open wide, trying to adjust to the absence of the light. Heart pumping harder, preparing for impact with the unknown. For a moment, I let the darkness rattle fear through my bones. So I point my head to the place I remember the ceiling to be, but to my surprise, I see the stars smiling back at me. And I focused in on one so long she began to speak, and she said, "Rest your head, my dear. You can withstand any darkness, for you are made of the light you seek. Remember, remember, remember who you are. You're one part stardust, two parts love, wrapped in divinity, and you shine brighter than the closest star." And I could see those who came before me, and I could see those still yet to come, and I could feel the strength in numbers as one of many the darkness once called home. And so I laid back down, and I closed my eyes, and I remembered how to breathe. And I fell asleep happy, knowing that that breath didn't just belong to me. And I awoke with clarity, and I awoke with peace, and when I came to, I was singing hallelujah. This weight of gratitude had brought me to my knees, because sometimes death does not equate with dying, and shadows can't exist without the light. Letting go just brings about a new beginning. There is no reason to fear the night. There is no reason to fear. There is no reason in fear, so let it go! Set it free and release the grip on those old wounds that can't heal, because you just won't let them be. You keep picking at the scabs just to watch them bleed. There are better ways to remember that you are alive, my dear. There are better ways to remember that you are alive. So stop falling in the holes that life has left behind. You are whole. You are holy. You are whole. You are holy. You are whole. You are holy. And you've just begun to shine.
Today we're here speaking with David Barsamian, host of Alternative Radio, which airs in the U.S. and abroad and locally here on KLCC. Welcome, David.
Pleasure to be on Occupy TV.
And so I understand you're here in town for the Social Justice, Real Justice Conference, and you're speaking on several panels. And the first one that jumped out at me was the one on drone warfare, Obama, and media spin. And actually here in Oregon, Eastern Oregon is attempting to become a drone testing zone, so it's becoming a local issue as well as an international issue. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about maybe a preview of what you'd be doing at the conference.
Well, drone warfare has become a weapon for the U.S. military increasingly in attacks on Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, and other countries as well. Drones are being used right now over Iran as surveillance tools. This is the latest and best weapon in the U.S. arsenal, as it were. And it has resulted in the deaths of many civilians, particularly in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But the great controversy about the drones has been the attacks and extrajudicial assassinations of American citizens, particularly in Somalia. But I would be a little cautious about defining drones as some horrible new weapon. Mm-hmm. What if those people were killed by helicopter gunships, as they are? What if they were killed by bombers or cruise missiles, as they are? Is that a better form of death? Of course not. So I think what is troubling people is that there isn't accountability, and there's an anonymity. People sitting in Virginia or Nevada.
The almost video game aspect.
Yeah, video game. They're at a joystick. There was this atrocious interview that Lara Logan did on CBS's 60 Minutes, which is regarded as the premier news investigative program on all of television, where she went to Nevada and she was beside herself, in ecstasy almost, seeing how these guys would be at the screen, you know, offing people, just, you know, using their jaw stick, and then going home at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, and their kids would run to the door, "Daddy, you're home. How was your day at work?" And they say, "Oh, great, wonderful." And she, you know, she didn't bat an eyelash. She thought this was quite extraordinary. And I remember during the course of that interview, she used the word unprecedented about 10 times. You know, this kind of word inflation, you know, that CBS had unprecedented access to this command center. This is the first time, this is unprecedented. No other broadcast, you know, crew has been inside this facility. So here again, you had a corporate journalist who was intoxicated with the process and not really peeling back the layers of the onion to reveal something crucial about warfare and imperialism.
I have secret access, but not what it is I have access to. Which actually leads me, you're known as a media critic. You mentioned the corporate media, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of the media in terms of information on things like drone, for example, drone warfare, or some of the warfare that's been going on in general.
Well, let's state clearly what the role, what is the function, what should be the function of a media in a democratic society. It should provide the citizens of that society with a wide range of opinion, perspective, and views from A to Z. That's the ideal. What is the reality? Since the early 1980s, there has been a tsunami of mergers and takeovers and concentration in the media. So back then, in the early 80s, there were 50 corporations that controlled most of the media in the United States. That number is down to 5. Ugh. Does this serve the communication needs of a democratic society? I don't think so. There is a range of opinion, but it's not A to Z, it's A to B. So the discussions and the embedded assumptions of corporate journalists, let's say like Anderson Cooper on CNN, who's highly regarded. You know, he's doing an interview, I saw this recently, with a retired Air Force general. And the question is, he asked the general, retired general, how effective would an attack on Iran be? Never mentioning international law, never mentioning morality, but it was about the efficacy. And then they had a discussion. You know, the general will say, well, if they go in with, you know, daisy cutters and bunker buster bombs and, you know, have a sustained air campaign, there's a good chance that all the Iranian facilities can be demolished. On the other hand, you know, the Iranians are very clever, you know, kind of Orientalism here, you know, those very sly Easterners, they don't play by the rules. They may have buried their facilities way, way underground where our bombs could not get to them. So this is already, you enter the discourse of infamy. You enter a discourse of criminality. And we're talking about how to do the crime. Well, I think, you know, imagine if you were robbing a bank. Well, you say, let's go in the back door. No, I'll say, let's go in the front door. It's easier. No one will suspect us going into the front door. And then we have a debate. But, you know, the morality and legality, of course, is completely obfuscated. It's completely elided. And it never comes up. So I think this kind of concentration of the media has led to a very impoverished discourse in the United States and a tremendous lack of information or awareness about the rest of the world. I mean, I spend a lot of time in South Asia and in West Asia, the Middle East, and the level of ignorance here about that part of the world is simply astonishing.
Do you think some of that lack of willingness to delve into morality as opposed to just how it functions, does that come from the idea in the United States that the media is objective in some way, just presenting the facts?
Well, that's of course the you know, the common statement that's made about the media, that it is fact-driven, it is objective, but the embedded assumptions are never examined. For example, an embedded assumption is the United States has the right to invade, attack, bomb, kill anyone in the world whenever it deems it necessary for its so-called national security or to defend its national interests. Of course, you never define a national interest. You know, it could be oil, it could be coal, it could be natural gas, it could be gold. It's this thing that's used, it's a term, again, of propaganda that's used to kind of unite us. Oh, I feel so much better. This is in the national interest. I'm benefiting, you know, not ExxonMobil, not BP, not Chevron Texaco, not any of the other big petrochemical complexes. So, you know, for a propaganda system to be effective, it has not to be noticed. It has to be virtually invisible and seamless. So, for example, that's not the case, let's say, in North Korea today, where you get very heavy-handed propaganda, and it's obvious what's going on. You know, the state is telling you what to think. Like in the Soviet Union in days gone by. In fact, people there knew that if the state was saying one thing, the opposite was true, because it was just so grotesque. It was just so transparently obvious that it was propaganda. But the system here in the United States is very developed. It's very sophisticated. Chomsky talks about it extensively in this new book I've done with him called Power Systems. Because in a democratic society, and the United States is a fairly open and democratic society, we're able to have conversations like this without stormtroopers bursting in the door and beating us up and, you know, smashing the cameras. But in a relative, let me qualify it as a relatively democratic society, the options of the bludgeon are diminished. It's not to say they're eliminated, but the state does not have at its ready the stick to beat you over the head and say, okay, now you do this, Camilla, or, you know, you're dead and your family is dead. You know, we know where you live. It's a much more subtle way to present the news in a so-called objective manner. But when you only have narrow points of view between A and B, then you really don't have a flourishing of information. You don't get the nutrition that you need as a consumer of news. You're actually starved for nutrients.
So David, given that we're here on Occupy TV, how do we strengthen the alternative media?
I think the alternative media is one of the shining lights in the United States today. And I've been doing alternative radio now for 27 years. And, you know, I started on a whim in Boulder, Colorado in 1986. I didn't even know what I was doing, and I made incredible mistakes. You know, I didn't turn the microphone on. Instead of hitting play, I would hit record and then erase the tape that I was supposed to play. I made all kinds of mistakes, but I was a quick learner, and I figured out how to do these things. It's not organic chemistry. But alternative media is a kind of elixir. It is a kind of tonic to the toxic waste that's spewed forth by the corporate control media. And so you see the success of programs. Democracy Now! Is on hundreds and hundreds of radio and TV stations around the country. That's a program that began in 1996. There's the program that I do. There are other programs as well. There are terrific websites that have come up in the last few years. So there is a growing independent media. And when I travel around the U.S., particularly among young people, they are hugely turned off to corporate control media. They don't need to be convinced that this is schlock and this is garbage and this is propaganda. And so more and more young people, I think, are turning to alternative media, are participating in alternative media, and are becoming journalists themselves. So that's a very exciting development.
And sort of traveling with the media now, you had mentioned you recently, within the last couple of years, had been, was it deported from India?
Yeah, I was deported. I've been from India. I've been going to that country since 1966. I had studied and lived there for many years. I have very close connections with India and the Indian people. But the Indian government decided to deport me in September of 2011, even though I had a valid visa. And I believe, since no explanation has ever been given to me, emails have not been responded to, letters, petitions, etc., It's like being in an Orwellian black hole, as it were. You know, you just disappeared. I'm almost certain it's about my reporting on Kashmir, which is a hugely sensitive issue to the Indian state. Kashmir is probably one of the most underreported crises in the world today. 80,000 Kashmiris have been killed. Hundreds of thousands have been wounded. 8,000 to 10,000 have been disappeared in the largest military occupation anywhere in the world today. There are 700,000 Indian security forces in the Kashmir Valley, which is not bigger than the Willamette Valley, by the way. So it's a fairly small area. So, and you have an enormous military presence. There's huge human rights violations. There's massacres and rapes of women and all kinds of abuses. Torture is routinely carried out. And I've been reporting on this. In fact, there was a case in 2009 where several thousand graves have been uncovered all over the Kashmir Valley of these people who had been disappeared. So there's a very tragic component of this, and I don't know about if there's any equivalent anywhere else in the world. In Kashmir, you have something called half-widows. That is, women who have lost or whose spouses, their dads, their brothers, their uncles have disappeared. They're told by the Indian state, we don't know where they are. Maybe they went to Pakistan, maybe they were kidnapped, maybe something untoward happened to them. But clearly there's an acute connection between these unmarked graves and all of these thousands of people that have been disappeared by the Indian state. So India has, you know, in the words of Arundhati Roy, has kind of nourished this image of being cuddly and so cool, and it's not like Pakistan. You know, Pakistan is all these jihadis and crazy people, but India is really cool. You know, it's Thomas Friedman's favorite country. He's constantly writing about it, how, you know, all these genius, high-tech people and call centers and other kinds of new electronic, developments there. But they completely ignore what's going on under the surface. And so Kashmir, to me, is a very, very important issue. And unfortunately, I was deported because of it. Other people have been deported. It's become routine now for the Indian state to use deportation to silence criticism, to silence dissent. And there is I'm going to use an analogy here. It's not perfect. No analogies are perfect. But India, for Kashmir, to Hindu nationalists, is somewhat akin to what Israel represents to Zionists. Mm-hmm. It's a hugely sensitive issue. Criticism is not tolerated. People who dissent from the hegemonic thinking are immediately labeled as, in very pejorative terms. So that's the kind of analogy that I would make to maybe help your viewers understand the situation a little bit better. But it's something that needs to be covered, and the Indian government is making sure that journalists cannot get into Kashmir to report on what's going on.
And is a little bit of the information not getting out, is that not only coming from India, but does it also come from a certain lack of interest from U.S. viewers, or because we don't know about it, we don't know to ask?
It's a combination of both. And India has been the Indian state has been very clever and skillful, particularly since September 11th, in framing everything in terms of terrorism. So this fits into a certain kind of U.S. discourse. Oh, those are crazy Muslims. They're terrorists. They're jihadis. They just want to kill for kill's sake. Mm-hmm. And so that does fit into a kind of U.S. framework of seeing the world, particularly the Muslim world.
And then,
and Kashmiris, I must say, are overwhelmingly Muslim.
Slowly drawing short on time, but we've got about 3 minutes left, and I'm wondering, to jump in topics again, if you could tell us a little bit about this new book you have out, Power Systems, with Noam Chomsky, or interviews by you?
Yes, interviews with Noam Chomsky. I've been working with Chomsky since the early 1980s. I may have the distinction, I don't know if it's a distinction or not, of having interviewed him more than anyone else in the world. This is our 10th book together, and we've really developed a rapport over the years. You know, he's known as this legendary MIT linguistics professor. He practically invented the field of modern linguistics, but he's also perhaps our premier analyst of the media and U.S. foreign and domestic policy. So he's a kind of renaissance man in terms of his enormous talents and syncretic ability to bring disparate information into a holistic way and to present that to a larger audience. So people like these books. They like the questions and answers. You know, I kind of put myself in the shoes of what people want to know. You know, what is the U.S. position on the Arab Spring? You know, what about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt? What role does oil play in the formulation of U.S. Middle East policy? Why does Israel have an outsized influence in the formulation of U.S. Foreign policy? What role do the media play in that? So all of these issues, you know, come up, and we're talking primarily about structural things rather than day-to-day, because there's structures of imperialism and capitalism in which everything must be viewed. I mean, that's the prism through which you must understand what's going on, not just domestically with the economy, but also internationally with U.S. foreign policy. Why does the United States have 735 military bases around the world? Why is it spending hundreds of billions, almost $1 trillion on the military in order to keep the peace? In order to expand the realm of democracy and freedom? These are highly propagandistic terms that I think need to be examined and exposed for what they are, and what they are blatant lies. The U.S. has this tremendous military force in order to extract resources, in order to control other peoples and other countries, and to further the profits of its many corporations.
I would love to get actually more into the idea of resource extraction and American imperialism still in this day and age, but I'm afraid we're starting to draw to a close. As we sort of end off, could you give us just a real quick idea of what some topics you'll be doing on your next couple of shows?
Well, I've done things on the tar sands in northern Alberta, which is probably the single most damaging environmental project on the face of the earth. And if the Keystone XL project is approved by the Obama administration, that tar sands oil will be moving through the United States, which can lead to environmental catastrophe on a number of levels. I'm doing that, yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. This has been David Barsamian, and I'm Camilla Mortensen. This has been Occupy TV.
The United States and Russia, of course, have huge supplies of nuclear weapons, around 5,000 total. But also Israel, France, Great Britain, India, and Pakistan have nuclear weapons as well. And even though the Cold War is over, the United States and Russia still have nuclear weapons on alert. They're in the air. We're 10 minutes away from a nuclear war, from a nuclear disaster. We're trusting in the governments of Russia and the United States to do the right thing, to not come up with some incident that might get the other country to fire their nuclear weapons. A number of years ago, in the 90s sometime, the Russians thought the United States might be attacking with nuclear weapons. Something over Scandinavia fooled them. We came really within minutes of going to war. The threat still exists. We still have all these nuclear weapons, and they're on high alert, and we're spending close to over $50 billion a year on our nuclear weapons program. Money that could be paying for our schools, paying to protect the environment. 2/3 of the DOE budget is for nuclear weapons. People think, oh, Department of Energy, solar power, wind power, doing the right thing for America. They're mainly creating a nuclear weapons infrastructure. And of course, the message to other countries is nukes are okay. So we're getting Iran to tell them, no, you can't have nukes. We're telling these other countries, what kind of message are we sending when we are creating new nuclear weapons, when we're trying to get more nukes? We don't have a leg to stand on. So that's why it's up to us, we, the people in this country, to do something about it. Here is a picture of the protests we had at Greenpeace organized at the nuclear weapons test site in Nevada in 1991. I was at that, and it was successful. We have actually gotten the United States to stop nuclear testing in the Nevada desert, and it was Oregonians who played the main role in that. Our then Congressman Mike Kopetsky and then Senator Mark Hatfield led the fight in Congress to stop nuclear testing. But it was Oregonians who drove it. It was Oregonians who made it happen. So we still need to be involved in this issue.
South of Christmas Valley is Lakeview. They had a uranium mine that somehow the government allowed this uranium mine. It became a Superfund site in the 80s. The price of uranium went down. These mining companies just abandoned ship and left these open pit mines that have killed and hurt the people of the regions with cancer and birth defects.
It's frustrating thinking, how can we still have nuclear weapons? I mean, President Obama, when he's running for re-election, said he was committed to a world without nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, the reality is otherwise. His administration is, pushing more nuclear weapons, and Congress is as well.
It is our responsibility to look out for one another on a global scale during these times. Due to the current climate, families on the mainland and at home in the sea face drastic changes to their health, environment, and resource lifestyles. As these facts reach more and more cultures, not much is done in respect for our lands. The habitat where I spent all of my childhood could no longer survive, resulting from these changes and other classified factors. I'm saving what culture I have left. My name is Thaston Ricklin. I'm from Marshall Islands, Medjero. It's a capital city in the Marshall Islands, and it is 7 feet above sea level right now, and they are experiencing the rising seas. Marshall Islands are 770,000 square miles of water, open ocean, with the land size of Rhode Island sprinkled across. So it's very, very small lands, and they are strategic places for missile testing because it's out of the United States view. The United States, under the Department of Energy, conducted 67 nuclear tests in the name of United States security and safety. And so there have been tests that have been conducted there, classified tests that are still being conducted there.
%of the uranium that's used for processing, either for weapons or for weapons grade or for energy, is left over. It's U-238, and over 99% of natural uranium consists of U-238, and it's left over after the processing. So what are they going to do with this stuff? It is, I think, along with tungsten, the two hardest minerals on Earth. And so the weapons industry has jumped on it. And the Department of Energy then colludes with the Department of Defense to provide this depleted uranium to make our weapons with. Now, this stuff is on the tips of our ordnance, and it cuts through tanks, it cuts through enemy armor. It's very, very efficient. When it does so, it develops enormous temperatures, like 600 degrees centigrade temperatures, and it particulates, fragments into tiny particles, and blows all over the place. It's breathed in, it gets in the soil, it gets in the water supply, it gets in the food supply, and it is about 40% less radioactive than natural uranium. So it is significantly radioactive. And its half-life is 4.5 billion years. So we are basically turning this entire part of the world into an uninhabitable wasteland.
The Department of Environmental Quality uses many different kinds of means for cleaning up waste, hazardous waste of all kinds. And there's certain things like mycology and natural ways to clean disasters up. The Earth is just like the human body. It's a miracle the way it heals itself. And if we just gave her a chance, reach out, call your legislator, talk to your representatives, talk to your neighbors, go to events.
there's still no media coverage on the islands. There's not a lot of news that gets out about what's going on down there because it's all covered up. It's been cemented. There's a lot of radioactive material that was compiled and put under a concrete dome, and it's still out there. And nobody knows what the numbers are, or how much radiation is leaking from that.
In a particular political position as the world superpower on this Cold War era that we kind of experienced, they really used Bikini as a proving ground, as a testing site. And it was a bigger blast than Hiroshima and bigger blast than Nagasaki, and yet there is very little information that's really known about it because so much is still classified. What really affects me with Bikini is the way that the youth in the Marshall Islands hold Bikini in this way, where they just wish that they could dust the fallout off the children of Bikini. And that is a story and a legacy that continues into generations. And so for me, as a woman, I connect to the loss of the choice of fertility in Bikini. The way that it was affecting the women is really what compels me to act stronger in the history, in the historical context. I have a power that can be expressed as a U.S. citizen, and I intend to fully use it.
Hanford is in the news, and it's been leaking for a while. So Fukushima is in the news, and it's been leaking for a while, and all these places around the world that are doing the exact same thing. Well, the Marshall Islands, there's not even a liner. There's not even any precautions, or it's international water, so anything goes.
I'm here with Lonnie Clark, a concerned citizen who is getting the word out about Fukushima and the nuclear meltdown, which we are coming up upon, I believe it's 2-year anniversary.
Right.
How did you become involved with the Fukushima issue?
Well, in May I had a nightmare about what I thought was Hanford, and I went to the computer in the middle of the night and discovered that Hanford, while it has problems, is not the big elephant in the room, and the big problem is Fukushima. There are 3 nuclear plants that have melted through their core and are continuing to melt through to the ground. And there's one other plant that is 100 feet up in the air with spent nuclear fuel rods tilting over. And the whole thing is still spewing out radioactivity.
And that's not something that's been making a lot of news lately. How is it that people don't know about this?
Well, the reason we don't hear about it is the media is owned basically by the same people that own the nuclear power plants. They have a vested interest in keeping the power plants going. And also the spent fuel rods fund the war machine. The nuclear weapons and depleted uranium. We now have guns, not just bombs. Depleted uranium weapons are used, and that their byproduct of the power plants is used in the war machine. So it's a concerted effort just to not talk about it. And in fact, you probably hear many journalists on television just say, we can't talk about it. If anyone asks them, they just say, we cannot talk about it, and they don't.
So I did see a story recently about they're still catching tuna that have radiation in it. What are some of the effects of the Fukushima meltdown that we should know about?
Well, I think the most disconcerting thing is that there is plutonium, cesium-137, 134, being poured directly into the Pacific Ocean, nonstop for 2 years now. 100% of the tuna are contaminated. It came out a few weeks ago that there's big plates of the coral reef along Hawaii that is dying and coming up off the floor ground. There's a 4-inch thick level of tsunami debris on the big island of Hawaii. We're about to get hit with a wave of tsunami debris that some of it's contaminated, some of it's not. But the Pacific Ocean is basically being contaminated completely with plutonium.
And what are some of the effects of that type of radiation on, for example, the fish in the ocean, but on the people as well?
Well, I'm not actually an expert. I'm learning about this, which is why I'm sponsoring this event, right? I want to bring, and I'm going to do it regularly because I want to bring people who know about this in on a regular basis because it's a gigantic lot of information to understand.
And the event that you're speaking of, is this post-ignorance
Right.
Where on Thursday, March 14th, you're going to be bringing in Kevin Blanch. And who is Kevin Blanch?
Well, Kevin Blanch is a video blogger that I saw, because when I started looking into this, you can't get any information on Fukushima just from the standard news. So sort of out of desperation, I went to YouTube to see if they had anything, and there are a bunch of citizen journalists there. There are a lot of scientists who there's a symposium that's going to happen on 3/11/2013 in New York at the New York School of Medicine. It's funded by the Helen Caldecott organization. And I guess 12, 13 people will be coming in to speak. There's a lot of information about the effects on humanity, on plant life, on the catastrophe, and what we've learned. But it's basically being buried. No one's talking about it because the overlords, so to speak, the media overlords just will not have it. They're not going to talk about it. They have too much of a vested interest.
And then going back to the original meltdown, I think when I think of Fukushima, I think of it being one particular reactor, and you're actually saying it's more than that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. It's actually 3 power plants that have melted down. There were 6 power plants there that were completely destroyed by the tsunami. 3 of them melted through to their core. I mean, it melted through, the corium melted through their containment center and are leaking into the groundwater and into the ground there. And then the number 4 power plant, where they have the spent nuclear fuel rods, the whole building was completely decimated. And so that is actually, they say, the most dangerous one, because if it collapses and falls over, it could create a gigantic explosion. I mean, it's got untold catastrophe all over it.
And you were talking about the media blackout on this, is that a blackout more in the United States? Do people in Japan know about this, or is it more of an international?
It is an international. The IAEA runs the nuclear energy industry, right? And it's basically in every single country. In Russia, there was a scientist who discovered that apopectin really helps your body stave off the effects of mild radiation. He did this study on the Belarus children who had gigantic amounts of thyroid cancer. They trumped up charges and put him in jail for 4 years. In Japan right now, journalists who speak about radiation effects, they can talk about nuclear power plants. They can report about nuclear power plants, but they cannot talk about radiation effects. They're being censored and thrown in jail, basically, if they continue to do it. And even here in the United States, I heard Carl Grossman on the radio, and he explained why we have this blackout. And it's not just the media, it's in universities, because where are the universities? Where are all these environmental people on universities? And basically, as Kevin is going to bring some reports that have been given to him by whistleblowers and biologists working at universities, they're basically being told, if you expose the story of nuclear radiation fallout, you lose your tenure. So that's these are serious things. People's livelihoods are being threatened if they even dare talk about radiation effects. You can talk about nuclear power plants and you can be an anti-nuke activist and talk out loud about it, but if you are a journalist and you're actually talking about the effects of what radiation does to the human body or to our environment, your livelihood is more likely to be threatened.
And then you were saying Kevin Blanch himself has some experience with the effects of nuclear radiation?
Right. He has leukemia himself, and he's been fighting it off. I mean, he went through horrible, an intense treatment in Salt Lake City, and he's now on the upside. I don't know if he's in remission, but he's made it through the first level of his treatment. His father died from radiation. His father was one of the first soldiers that was in the nuclear test site where they tested it out on soldiers, and his dad died at a very young age from nuclear. Well, he says from nuclear. This is the thing about it. The doctors don't ever identify nuclear fallout as being directly linked to the kind of cancer you get. And this is what I've discovered. The government allows all these nuclear power plants to emit low levels of radiation all the time so that all of us have a footprint of radiation in our blood system. So you can't say it's one thing or another. But they're kind of the secret they're the quiet kind of killer, because they could be dormant in your body for 10, 15 years, and then all of a sudden you get cancer and you're dead in 5 years.
You're from the Northwest, right?
I'm not.
You're not? Okay, I was going to ask if you're familiar with Art Robinson, who was running against Peter DeFazio for Congress, and he had a theory of radiation hormesis.
Right, I know.
And this idea that low levels of radiation are actually beneficial. Have you read anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's just hooey. The reality is, I mean, that's just not a real true, that's not real science, you know. I read a lot of that. In fact, I have articles about that, contesting it point by point. I'm not a scientist, but I've done a lot of my own research in an effort to be able to answer questions on this for myself. I have a lot of questions on how it will affect it, because I understand that radiation causes DNA mutations. My grandchildren were born in Oregon, and they were born, you know, in the last 5 years, which means that they have an imprint from Fukushima. So, and potentially, my great-grandchildren could be mutated because of Fukushima.
Given the difficulty in getting information and getting information out there, you were saying you didn't really have a background in this before. This is something you've taken on. How would you recommend to folks that want to find out more about the effects of radiation or about these nuclear meltdowns, how would you recommend to them to find out?
Well, I started, when I really started finding out, I went to places like HelenCaldicott.org. She has a nuclear website. CarlGrossman.com is a good place. You can Google it. You can't really get, you're going to have to do a little bit of research, but there are organizations out there that, in our own town, we have Calc and we have WAND, who have done a lot of really good efforts on exposing what happens with nuclear activities.
And so that's community, I remember what Calc said, Community Alliance.
Community Alliance of Lane County. Right.
And then WAND is?
I don't remember, I don't know what the name of it is, I have to admit it. But
well, they both do a lot of really good
outreach. Yeah, they really do. I mean, both of them have been really good about bringing out information, but you know, you can get involved in these local organizations, or just, I honestly think that what I really want to do is motivate people to call our representatives to stop believing the lies of the IAEA and demand answers.
Okay. Since we are located here in the Northwest, and maybe, I should know my geography better, but a couple 100 and something so miles south of the Columbia River, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation is just over the river from us, and I know you were saying that Fukushima is more the big, the elephant in the room, but what about Hanford? I believe it had a meltdown recently. Or not meltdown,
not just a meltdown. Hanford was the first nuclear power plant built in the United States, and it is actually rated the third most toxic nuclear site in the entire world. And the company that owns the property to be able to manage the waste management basically went on the cheap with everything, and instead of putting double lined barrels, they put singular lined barrels, and they knew they did this. So about 2 weeks ago, it came out that one of the fuel supplies had been leaking. A few days later, it's 3, now it's 6. Ron Wyden brought a delegation up there last week. And they're going to be, he's asked the Government Accountability Office to investigate, to find out what the level of truth is up there, and what the level of threat is. Because they apparently have got no idea how to fix what they've got going on up there.
So with the sort of combined, we've got Fukushima across the ocean and Hanford close by. Is it of a particular concern for Oregonians?
I should think so. I mean, that's why I started jumping up and down, to be honest. That's what made me go, you know what? When I heard Carl Grossman say we each need to do what we can, I realized, you know what? I could invite Kevin Blanch or somebody, one of those citizen journalists out there, or somebody, and I've decided to start having these post-ignorant events so that we can start waking up, and people can actually take responsibility and be adults, be the adults in the room to get real answers.
And about how often do you plan to have these events?
About every 3 to 4 months. I'm hoping in June or July something then, and then again in, I don't know, November, December. Every few months, it depends on, frankly, every few days there's some major catastrophe going on with nuclear power plants somewhere in the United States. I mean, even when Hurricane Rita came, Oyster Creek missed having a Fukushima event by 6 inches. It was almost topped by the water by 6 inches. So, you know, my idea is just to keep bringing information and experts so that we can all become educated on this and find out what we can do, not only about how to stop nuclear energy, but how to protect our bodies and how to protect our children. Because there are things you can do to stave off mild levels of radiation.
I'd love to hear more about that, actually. What can people do?
Well, one of the things you can do is take kelp on a regular basis, a non-Pacific source kelp, obviously non-Pacific. Eat organic, eat well, exercise. The way Kevin says it is just pretend you have cancer now. You know, eat like you have cancer now. Stay off of chemicals, exercise, take your vitamins on a regular basis, keep your body healthy. These are the things that stave off low radiation levels. And you can take good sources of kelp that will help you, and miso. You can have miso on a regular basis. That also seems to help. That scientist in Russia says apopectin, high levels of apopectin. So I think as this story unfolds and becomes more and more and more of a catastrophe, because it will build up, I think we're going to be having more mainstream ideas on how to protect ourselves.
Are there, you mentioned Oyster Creek, are there other plants that are of concern that you know of here in the United States? For example, if there are future...
Frankly, all of them are of concern. They're all old. They're all in levels of disrepair of one or the other. And the worst part about it is anybody who tries to report catastrophes to their boss, they get reprimanded or they get fired. And you know, that's kind of the general rule of thumb of the IAEA. Instead of fixing the problems, they cover it up, they quiet the whistleblowers, and they move on and say, well, we'll deal with it when we get to it. The problem is this isn't like, you know, your car's broken down, you're going to break down on the side of the road. This causes worldwide catastrophe.
You were speaking of sort of things that you can do, sort of eat like you have cancer, so kelp, other types of things. Are there other ways of protecting oneself? Is it mainly through lifestyle choices? Or?
It is mostly through lifestyle choices, from what I understand. Again, like I said, I'm very new. This is what makes it so catastrophic, is we don't really know a lot about it. There hasn't really been a lot of information that's been allowed out there. Hopefully when this symposium comes out next month in New York, we'll get more information from the scientists that have been studying it. There are some scientists that are doing some studies specific to this answer. And so I think as we move along, we're going to find more and more information out.
And that's the symposium that's going to be on the anniversary of the original Fukushima
For 2 days
disaster.
in New York, right?
So as sort of a concerned citizen, how... we talked a little bit about how concerned citizens can find out more, but what can other citizens do to get the information out, to find out more about this, to get nuclear meltdowns stopped?
Well, obviously, I'd like to have a really strong showing on March 14th, and I hope that I've heard that there will be some type of a march on the 2-year anniversary, 3/11/11/2013, here in town. Support the protests. Contact your elected officials. Contact the energy commissions at the federal level. Contact the nuclear regulatory energy. You know, the problem is not enough people speak out, and we just believe what they tell us. Oh, don't worry, you've got low levels, and frankly, we play kind of whack-a-mole with the energy industry. They take away nuclear, they give us coal, and coal releases uranium, which is just as toxic, right? So it's kind of all in tandem. It's all bad. But I think, for me, I think what's the most important thing is that each one of us take responsibility and get active. Like, it doesn't mean you have to make it your whole entire life, but call your representatives. Know who your elected representatives are. Your local, your state, your federal, and call them at least once a week about this and say, what are we doing about nuclear energy and the lies of the IAEA? And I called the White House last week. I called Ron Wyden's office. I called Jeff Merkley's office. I called Pete DeFazio's office. And I suggested that we get Bechtel taken off. Bechtel is the corporation that oversees Hanford. Okay. And they've done a mess of it. They did nothing but lie. And I think they need to lose their contract.
So Who are the officials who've been most responsive to these sorts of questions? I think you mentioned that Wyden had gone out to Hanford.
Yes, Ron Wyden. Well, you know, he's a new chair of the Energy Commission in the Senate this term. So he's taking a really active role on it. Barbara Boxer's been very, very active. For me, I just call them all. I call as many people as I can on a regular basis because so few people call our representatives. Just like so few people vote, less people call their representatives. So, I mean, my point is that we need to get ourselves being responsible citizens. And being a responsible citizen means knowing the issues and engaging in them. It doesn't have to become your life, but you do have to engage and let them know what we really think.
In addition to calling, do you recommend things like, for example, writing letters or letters to the editor or?
All of the above, yeah. Do whatever, like Carl Grossman said, do whatever you think you can do. Whatever comes to you is probably the right thing. And that's, I mean, that works for me, which is why I decided to sponsor this event, because I had been calling. And you know, like I said, I'm a member of CALC, I'm a member of WAN, but guess what? Obviously, we need to do more.
So this is Lonnie Clark, and she's here speaking to us about the Fukushima disaster. And the event she has coming up is the Post-Ignorance with Kevin Blanch. She'll be speaking on Thursday, March 14th at Harris Hall. And if people want to find out in the last couple seconds we have left more about how these events, where could they go?
Well, they could email me at nutsforart@gmail, nutzforart@gmail. You can contact Kevin Blanch. He has a YouTube channel. He actually has a website, I believe.
Okay.
So you could contact him. But I also encourage people to reach out to sites like Helen Caldicott's site. It's helencaldicott.org, I believe. And she has a wealth of knowledge.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in. This is Occupy TV, and this is Camilla Mortensen, and I've been speaking with Lonnie Clark, a concerned citizen working on issues of nuclear meltdowns.
Thank you so much.
If Germany can do it, we can do it. You know, across the world, they're making decisions to say no to nuclear, and I know that the American people are smarter than this, that we can stand up and say, that's what we want. We want a healthier planet. We want to spend our money cleaning up the nuclear radioactive material that we've already created and stop creating more.
Hanford is now the most contaminated nuclear site in the Western world. They have 53 million gallons of highly radioactive waste there. They're stored in 177 tanks in the ground, some of them unlined, some of them inadequately lined, and they're leaking.
So this comes out to the river, to the ocean in Astoria. One time a worker at Hanford was cited for having radiation when he was leaving home, and they wanted to see where it was from, and they scanned him, and it was his tummy, and it was clams he'd eaten for lunch that came from the mouth of the river, which means everybody who eats anything from there, food products coming from the Columbia River, might be eating radioactive materials.
The situation with Hanford has been going on for a long, long time, and it comes out in the news as if it's a brand new thing, and it's hard to believe that we don't have the means to make it happen. They talk about how much money it's going to cost and how long it will take, but if the same means that are going into the war machine and actually hurting people with these nuclear materials would go into the cleanup, we could probably clean our planet up, clean our country up. Like, the United States has so many nuclear plants, it's unbelievable. We live right in the middle of it. We don't even realize that they're experimenting with nuclear. They have a quarter-sized nuclear reactor. It's 30 miles from where I live. When I hear about the issues of nuclear war and radioactive materials seeping into our groundwater, into the rivers and into the ocean, and the outright neglect of government to take care of problems regarding nuclear issues and to care for its people and make sure that we're not being harmed by the means for them to make big money, I get a bit overwhelmed, and I try to figure out how I can make a difference and how this information can be turned into something good. I believe that educating ourselves is the key to making sure that we don't run around with our blinders on, and that we address the issues, even the hard ones, even the ones that seem impossible. We are the people that have the power to change the world. We're the people we've been waiting for, and we can reach out to our representatives and we can put the pressure on, and that's how it works. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's the lack of paying attention to the fact that it's there and pretending that it's not existent in our lives that makes it so that we don't take precautions. So in this day and age, we have so much technology, it's completely within our means to do things like filter the water and put in radon detecting devices so we know if we have serious issues inside our homes, and test the waters instead of ignoring the figures or trying not to get the figures, so you don't have to pretend that they're not as bad as they are. One way that you can learn to protect yourself is to maintain a healthy thyroid, because your thyroid controls how much you can withstand radiation in your environment. There's healthy ways in your diet to maintain a healthy thyroid full of iodine, and when your thyroid has an iodine level that is full, then you can withstand quite a bit of radiation, actually. Like we do withstand radiation on a regular basis. Another way to address issues when it comes to any kind of environmental disaster or any kind of risks for having issues, both nuclear or otherwise, would be to just prepare. You know, the American Red Cross recommends that we all keep a disaster kit available. It could help you survive through a serious storm, through a total disaster in nuclear world, through any kind of, you know, minor power outage.
Eugene, Oregon is one of very few places that actually, they have citizens outside that put nuclear-free signs outside their doors, so it's an inspiration to come here and see that. It's in the Yakwe. For the Marshallese, that means you are the rainbow, and that's how we greet each other. And that's also how we say goodbye, Yakwe.